Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our regular series about the example projects that are delivered with Oracle Policy Modeling. This week we're going to be talking about hazard management. Hazard management, if I go over to the example project list and scroll down till I see hazard management, is targeting a specific set of industries and is talking about when you need to report a spillage or a need to store a potentially hazardous product, and what the protocol or the procedure is to manage that spill or to document the storage of the product. And of course, the protocol will depend on how toxic or how hazardous the product is. And that's what this interview is all about. I've already been messing around, so I'm just going to copy and replace. And let's take a brief look at the interview. We're going to look at three things today. We're going to look first of all at a particularly interesting feature that has been implemented for the first screen in the interview, and that is called preceding. Then we'll look at explanations, and then we'll, as a bonus, discover that there is a decision service example project which it can be used with hazard management. If you don't know what a decision service is, you'll find a link in the article that accompanies this video that takes you to an online training all about decision services. Anyway, let's get started first of all with this screen. So if you're doing a demo of this project, or if you're looking at ways to teach yourself Oracle Intelligent Advisor, or you just want to extend what already works here, I want you to notice that here on the first screen we have a single question: what would you like to do today? And the attribute is a simple text attribute called the interview purpose, and it has a technical name of purpose, and it has been marked as being seedable from a URL parameter. What does that actually mean? It means that if the URL to run this interview contains a purpose, then essentially this screen will no longer be relevant because we will have the answer to the question, what would you like to do today? And we'll demonstrate it in just a second. There's another piece of good news. You may not know this, but if I go to my browser, Online Help, and look for example policy models, under hazard management, you'll see that it's possible to actually view the hazard management project in a live version. So I'm going to open the link in a new tab, and you'll see that right now I have this first question. And if I choose dispose of a container, I'm asked about the container, choose the answers here, and I go through a series of questions and I see an explanation. Fine. So the good news is there's a pre-deployed version for you to look at. And let's use this pre-deployed version to demonstrate URL preceding. So what I've done is the following. I've taken the link that is in the online documentation. So I went back to the online documentation and I just copied this link. So that's the link to get to the online version of the project. And then I started to build my seed data. Seed data takes this format. Seed data with a capital D equals followed by a JavaScript object. In our case, what we essentially want to say is something like this. We want to say, this is the purpose. This is why I'm coming to the interview today. But the way to do it is you take the object and you use, for example, an online URL encoder to take that original text and encode it so that it now looks like this. And this is going to be the URL. So it's going to be this plus this. So let's go up here and grab that and go to our browser. And let's open a new browser tab. I'll paste that in. And when I launch the interview, you'll notice that it goes straight past the first question and starts asking me about a spill. So the preceding has avoided me having to answer this question. So if you're coming from another website where you've already selected that you want to dispose of a container, that will feel much more efficient. So I've also copied, or rather prepared this one. So this is the other possible response. Let's go to that one, close that tab, open a new tab, and instantiate the interview saying I want to store a container. So this time round, it's talking about the other option. And if I go back to my interview, it's gone into all the stuff about waste details and so on. So that's what preceding a URL in a URL can do for you. Of course, you can have multiple attributes. It doesn't have to be one. So what you might like to do is, for a demo, for example, is for one of them, one of the questions, consider making this also seedable from a URL parameter, giving it a technical name, and then using it in your seed data to demonstrate how the question can be pre-answered. The second thing that you could consider demonstrating or extending if you're working on this project is the fact that there are multiple explanations to be found on different summary pages. I'm currently in the waste disposal section, and each of these explanations has dynamic display attributes which you could play with. And of course, any explanation of any attribute, if we take, for example, the waste is extremely hazardous, the waste is extremely hazardous, first of all, I'll take off the visibility rule so we can see it all the time, just for now. Any explanation, you can start demonstrating the explanation options. For example, if I make this silent, I'll make it silent always, in fact. And then I'll go and execute the interview another time, and we'll reset. So I want to dispose of a container. It's liquid waste. It's hazardous. Is it empty? No. The waste is hazardous. You'll notice that in the not extremely hazardous, we have no detail available to us. Then if we return to the extremely hazardous attribute again and go back to explanation options, we can uncheck them all and we can rerun that. And now we have the detail available to us. So you can start to play with the options. You can make this silent, or you can hide it, you can make it invisible. The third and final thing that we're going to look at is probably the most exciting. So one thing that you may be aware of is that there's now this feature called decision services, which can be written entirely in the hub. And to go with that, the very latest version of the online documentation now includes example decision service projects that you can download and try out. And one of them is actually a decision service version, or rather part of the hazardous waste concept. So what you could do is you could download this particular project definition, load it up into your hub, which I've already done, and then from your Hazman OPM project, go into the Rules tab, create a new reference, if necessary, of course, log into your hub, and you should be able to, at that point, find your project and observe the contract. You can see here that it wants to output to me some hazardous wastes with a level and a waste name. Now that I know that, I can go to my data tab and create an attribute, create an entity called the hazard, and we'll call it the hazards, and we'll return, add the reference, select the project again from the list of decision services, and we can then go about mapping it to our new entity, and also creating attributes for the input items. So now I have an inferred entity called the hazard, and of course I can choose to display that on any of the relevant pages. For example, this one, where it says, please check this list of known hazardous wastes. I could replace this with something a little bit different. I could simply remove that so that it's just a label, and underneath I could add a new entity container for the hazard, and I could add my two new attributes, which should be down here somewhere, the hazard and the hazard level. I'll make sure that the attribute is not personal. There we go. So that we can now configure this. Let's make it into a tabular display. So we can say hazard, and this is level. And we could now run our debugger, and of course the debugger this time will go and connect to the decision service and will pull down anything from the output contract from the decision service. So we can demonstrate how the decision service is now displaying a list of known hazards. These are coming from the decision service, and you can see that is the hazard entity. And as a final touch, of course, what we could do is we could create a new relationship, such as the selected hazard. And we could say that this is a single hazard. And we could add that to our page as a relationship collect. And we could also create a slightly more customized display for our interview collect by saying that we want to display the hazard and the hazard level in the relationship collect. There we go. And once we have that, we can do something like this, and the user can select a hazard. Of course, if you want to select a hazard, then you're very likely going to want to create a new document in order to take advantage of it. For example, you could do something like this. Let's use the rule assistant, speed things up a bit. And we could do something like this as well. So now we have two new attributes, one for the selected hazard and one for the selected hazard level. With these two new attributes, we could, of course, give them some technical names. So let's call this selected, well, let's call the other one selected level. We could then add this to our interview as a label and say something like, you selected, which is thus. So we've used the two attribute technical names as substitution variables in a label in order to be able to take advantage of the two attributes that we created here, which will select the hazard name and the hazard level from the selected hazard relationship collect. In not so many words, what will happen is the user can select a hazard and we can repeat it to them in a label underneath. Of course, once we have the selected hazard, we could perhaps use the logic of what is the selected hazard to ask specific questions. So we could begin to create a page for a specific hazard. And we could begin the process by adding a Boolean such as this one. Once we have our Boolean attribute created, then of course we could go to the interview and we could create a new screen for a specific hazard and implement a rule that says display this if this particular hazard is selected, and then create new attributes, new questions specific to that scenario. So that just about wraps it up for our guided tour of what is new and what is exciting in this project. Perhaps the thing to remember is that now you're going to be able to use both example projects for Oracle Policy Modeling and also example decision services. That's it for this time. See you next time. Bye-bye.